Okay, I think we're gonna go and get started, mostly because I had a horrible dream last night that I missed this meeting and I woke up in a panic this morning. I guess with that, good morning. Hello to everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Um, Happy New Year to those of you that I haven't yet seen this year. It's 2021, can't believe it. In some ways, it still feels like we're navigating 2020, but we won't go there this morning. We're gonna, just dive into our conversation today. I am the coordinator of My Best. My name is Precious Miller, and I am here from the Michigan Center for Student Success, and it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. The content of today's workshop will encompass tools and strategies for connecting with community-based organizations, which is the primary focus for the beginning half of this year, to help what is happening with you and with your students and really enrich your campus community. So welcome everyone. My hope is that everyone will be able to walk away with at least one strategy or one way to be able to partner with those in your community to strengthen the supports available to your students. Or perhaps you will be able to walk away with a better survey of the wealth of partnerships that are also available in your community. So we have a full morning of content. The agenda and slide deck is available on MCCA's website. The slide deck, as well as the recording, will also be shared out at the end of our time together today when we have an opportunity to make sure that we condense the recording to fit your needs. And I see Katie is adding a link to resources in the chat. Thank you, Katie. So I begin each event with the introduction of my amazing colleagues, Jenny Shanker, Erica Oriens, and Katie Giardello. I know that we are better together, and I know that none of the work we do with My Best, Guided Pathways, our transfer work, the work we do for advocacy on behalf of community colleges, none of that would be possible without our team approach. And so I am just ever grateful and thankful for the ways in which I learn from my amazing colleagues. If you have any questions for myself or any of us, we make ourselves available to you to ask any of those and let us know how we can be a better support to you all. Okay, so as you can see, we have the agenda here before you. We are joined by Jobs for the Future. And you'll see that they'll be sharing a presentation in today's agenda. We will first begin with an overview of what will take place this year in the My Best project before hearing from JFF. And we will then take a break to check the mail, refill our coffee. I'm gonna make sure that my 6-month-old is still in good shape with dad downstairs. And then we'll regroup for the latter portion of the event, which includes information about My Bridges as a whole and how it can be an instrumental tool when identifying organizations you would like to partner with. We will also have a panel discussion, which I am so looking forward to getting to today. During the panel, we will hear from a few colleges and a community organization regarding their approach and experience with connecting with organizations in their community. We will then go into breakout rooms because we all know we love that intimate connection in this virtual setting, which will allow for everyone to share any aha moments you might have throughout the morning. And then we'll end with next steps for our project, and I will offer about a self-care or a self-care challenge to you as you go into the rest of your day. So I hope that sounds appetizing and appeasing to everyone. So strap on in, we're gonna get started. Okay, so Zoom engagement is something that many of us are familiar with. I welcome you all to rename yourself to include your name and the initials of your institution or organization. This will allow for everyone to better connect during the workshop, especially when we later go into our randomized breakout groups. So to get everyone warmed up with participating in today's conversation, because at this point, most of you know that I love and appreciate engagement, I welcome you all to join me in a bit of a virtual energizer, especially for those who haven't yet had their second, third, or fourth cup of coffee. So a little birdie told me that there was a Super Bowl game this past Sunday between Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So in the chat, I welcome you to share how you enjoyed your Sunday. Did you root for Kansas City? Did you root for Tampa Bay? Did you root for the commercials like I did? Did you root for the food, also like I did? Or did you cash in on an early bedtime? So go ahead in the chat, share how it is that you spent your Super Bowl Sunday. Okay. So great, seeing some things coming through the chat. Go commercials. Yes, early bedtime. I hear that. No football for Michelle. Okay, reading a book. Dare to share what book you're reading. Early bedtime, snacks for the family. Okay, good, good, good. So did anyone root for Tampa Bay? Commercial, food, and family. Okay, Tom Brady. Oh, this is so great. Brunch before with the kids. Yeah. Glad the goat did it again. I'm with you, Lori. Or so my husband is. He told me about it as I was watching the commercials. I was really only there for the commercials and the food. Go Bucks. All right, Lisa. This is great. So as you felt comfortable sharing in the virtual Energizer, I welcome you to continue to engage and share and interact and post what resources have been really helpful for you as we're, all still navigating the pandemic and navigating the changes that are taking place on our campuses. I love the engagement. All right, so now when considering My Best as an entire project, we have goals we have rallied around. And I find these goals to help anchor our work and help us focus in on our project activities. So the focus of year one, outside of navigating the pandemic, was to understand the needs of students and the community. Though the pandemic presented a lot of challenges and a lot of ways we approach our work, it has also helped us understand the student experience and challenges that students face, especially when we think about the technology divide. But now entering into year two of the project, our focus now is to integrate the economic stability practices of My Best into the campus practices. So we plan to do this through the strategies listed underneath this goal, which include continued conversations with the financial stability scale of adoption assessment, which I'll talk about briefly in a moment. Then we'll also be looking for ways to more thoughtfully integrate the MyBridges public benefit system into campus practices and integrating community supports into the campus practices at your institution. And then goal 3, we will do some more thought and more intentional cross-sharing with everyone, though, cross-sharing is going to happen at every touch point of the project. Okay, so many of you may already be familiar with the financial stability scale of adoption assessment. I'll just quickly go over it in the event that a refresher might be nice or you're not as familiar as some of your counterparts. So the FSOA is one way we shorten it. The FSOA, the Financial Stability Scale of Adoption Assessment, is a campus assessment used to evaluate how far along your institution is in strengthening students' financial stability at scale, right? So every student across the institution feels empowered to do well, and financial stability matters and economic stability matters. The practices that you see listed here: understand student needs, organize and connect supports, connect partner supports to students, and ensure student access to supports. Those are the 4 pillars of the FSOA, of the assessment. So in today's conversation, we'll have a pointed focus on connecting partner supports to students. Throughout year two, though, we will revisit these four pillar practices to keep them top of mind. I know with a lot of moving parts with this project, it can be easy to not always remember the why or the what or the how. And so I'll do my best to make sure that I am keeping the four pillars of the scale of adoption assessment in the forefront of the things and of the events and activities that we do. So we'll be revisiting these throughout the year and talking about how we can make sure that we're scaling these practices. So many of you may also remember the administration of the Trellis Student Financial Wellness Survey from last year. And even saying last year, I feel some type of way because in some ways it feels like a new year and in some ways it feels like an extension of 2020. But where does time go? It just keeps on going forward. So with the administration of the Trellis survey, the survey results will be shared during March, so next month, just a few short weeks away from now. If your institution participated in the survey, you can anticipate the receival of the results for your specific institution. Trellis will, though, also provide all institutions with a broader overview of the financial needs of the students in Michigan. So if you are interested in seeing student needs from a national perspective as well, Trellis will also produce a publication with that information on their website when it becomes available. They haven't yet shared with me when the national perspective or publication will be available, but I know that it is something that they do annually. What you'll see on this slide is a reminder of how Trellis data has been used at other institutions. And my hope is that seeing how other institutions have used Trellis data will generate some ideas of how you would like to use Trellis data once you receive it. Some of you may not have seen the question set offered by Trellis Research when the survey was administered last October. So here's a sample question that was asked on the 2019 Trellis survey. Through today's conversation, though today's conversation will be about community partnerships, I think it's important to also think about forming partnerships that also align with the student data received from the Trellis survey. The sample question here asks about a student's use of public assistance. So based on the results of your student population, you can better target which community supports are most needed by your students. Following this question are an array of other questions that also break out into more specific economic stability experiences within given areas of food assistance, housing, childcare, and what have you. So here we see a question on the topic of housing. So with housing, what is a specific trigger to a student being unstable? When connecting with a community partner, it's good to have the specific need in mind to help with crafting a partnership to meet the needs of your students. So it's a great way to do some case making with members of your institution as well. If you are interested in seeing all of the questions asked during the Trellis survey, that is also a resource available on MCCA's website. And then you can have a better idea of what results you can anticipate receiving next month when you receive your once you receive your Trellis data. Okay, so this question reflects the student's perspective of the institution that they are engaged with. It asks about the student having support services to help address their financial situation, having faculty at their school understand their financial situation, their school actively working to reduce financial challenges, and their use of financial support services offered. I am aware that some of you have already begun to partner with community organizations and may already have those partnerships established and in place. But the data you receive from this question could help you gauge ways you can better integrate services into the students' interactions with the academic and non-academic activities. So just keep that in mind, that as much as the Trellis results can inform partnerships to form, the Trellis data can also inform ways in which your institution can better integrate services into the student's experience. The receival of Trellis data is only a portion of the activities that will take place this year. So here you will see all of the My Best events that are set to take place in 2021. I know, 2021 just started, but in my mind, we are already in December. So I thought it would be helpful to share with you the events that will take place over the course of the year. You will notice that we don't yet have a topic outlined for the events held in July and September. And this is because we want to be thoughtful about the information we bring to you, and because we're unsure of what topics will be most pertinent during that time of year, given the navigation of the pandemic. You can, however, feel free to connect with me and share any ideas you may have for content you would like us to specifically embed in our events. And stay tuned for the content for those months to be announced at a later date. We're also planning to have a focus or essential theme during each quarter of the year as well. So starting with equity in quarter one, and then listening to students in quarter two, focusing on the health of higher education practitioners in quarter three. And I am a strong advocate for the health of all of us, because we can give the best care to others when we are also caring for ourselves and making sure that our needs are met. And then in quarter four, we will focus on connecting students with resources. And so the intent and purpose behind having a focus for each quarter is it allows for us to be able to share what we're doing with those we engage with, especially in our digital spaces, which brings me to share what we're doing on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you've been following us, bravo. If you haven't yet joined us, here is the shameless plug to get on board. If you're interested in connecting with us digitally, you can follow us on Twitter and most recently now LinkedIn. This month, we have shared posts celebrating Black History Month. And we have really enjoyed engaging with colleagues across the state, but also across the country. So thank you, Internet, for allowing us to connect with those who are from far ends of the country and the world. We do have an upcoming tweet chat on Tuesday, September 23rd. And this tweet chat is going to be scheduled from 11:45 to 12:30. So if you are taking a lunch break and you're like, hey, I wonder what's happening with MCCA in their digital spaces, I encourage you to join us for that conversation from 11:45 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. But you can also join the conversation at a later date in the event that you aren't able to join us live. We will again continue with quarter one's focus of equity, and the coming tweet chat will follow suit with that, with a digital chat about transfer as an equity issue. You can feel free to join us during your lunch break again, and invite your colleagues to also join us in this really inspiring and energizing conversation. Now, regarding LinkedIn, our engagement on this platform is still growing, but it is growing, and we'd love for you to grow with us. We have most recently shared articles that have reflected our equity content. We are, however, looking to expand with featuring shared articles of colleges who are doing exciting work in the area of student success and different strategies that have worked on at your institution. So we may call on some of you in the near future to see if you're interested in writing a featured article about what's happening at your campus. So in all of the digital engagement we're doing, it's important to know though that our aim in doing all of this is to connect with individuals in higher education and to connect those individuals with one another to offer an informal way for engagement and connection. Social distance networking. Yes, that is it in a nutshell. So we hope that you all feel comfortable joining us in that space. And if not, and you're new to the Twitter world, you can join me because I am new to that world as well. So we can enjoy the digital journey together as we socially distance in our networking. So I am a few minutes early, but I'd love to introduce Jobs for the Future in today's event. I welcome Stacy Holliday, Senior Project Manager. She's going to be moderating today's discussion and giving high-level remarks about JFF's Ecosystem Partnership Tool. Charlotte is the Senior Director. She's going to be describing the asset mapping process to do case making around why an asset map is beneficial for your institution. And then Rachel, Associate Director, is going to describe the college community organization partnerships in action through the Kresge Boost initiative. Before turning things over to JFF, I'd like to ask that if you have any questions that you would like to pose, please place those in the chat. Your question is going to be tracked at the end of the presentation for a moderated Q&A. So if you have a question, place it in the chat and it will be seen and tracked and answered during the Q&A portion of JFF's Share Out. So with that, Stacy, Charlotte, and Rachel, I turn things over to you. So I'll stop sharing my screen and you can feel free to share yours at this time.
This is Dave Altstadt with JFF as well, another colleague. And I'm sharing my screen. I want to see if it's come through appropriately.
I can see it.
Yeah, it looks good, Dave.
That's great.
Okay, thank you. And just checking in with my colleagues. Stacy, are you on the line?
I am. Thanks, Dave.
Great. I'll turn it over to you then.
All righty. We are so happy to be here with all of you this morning. Thank you, Precious. Thank you, Erica. And to get to talk about one of our favorite things, partnership and collaboration. And my colleagues, Charlotte Cahill and Rachel Pleasance McDonald, will be presenting with me today. And of course, I'm sure many of you know Dave, who works closely with Erica and Jenny as a strategic partner for the Student Success Center. Just a reminder, as I'm sure Precious shared with you already, just to type any questions that you have in the chat for us. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. And our time with you is short. Dave, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. There we go. We're going to cover a lot today, and we are eager for additional opportunities as well to continue to connect with all of you as you engage in this work. Today, we're going to discuss some benefits we've observed of partnership among the colleges in our networks. We'll share a new resource that JFF has developed, the Ecosystem Partnership Tool. Charlotte will describe an asset mapping, which is a process that JFF facilitates. And Rachel will share some examples of partnership and action that our communities engage in through our Boost initiative. So just to ground us for a moment, we want to share a few of our core principles in this work. We acknowledge that we're operating during a time of constant change, and colleges are now charged with helping students value and commit to learning while dealing with crisis. So we can only truly help students holistically achieve equitable success if we listen to and work with one another. We know that this is not easy or quick, but it's important work, and it demands and deserves our time and attention. We need to make it a priority. For 35 years, JFF has led the way in designing innovative and scalable solutions that create access to economic advancement for all. We envision a true work and learning ecosystem, a future in which people of all ages can access and benefit from learning opportunities that meet them where they are, prepare them for the future, and lead to economic mobility, supported by an integrated ecosystem of learning, workforce, and community organizations. And so we really dug in to examine how can we help colleges engage with partners throughout the ecosystem. To do this, we engaged key stakeholders within our network, and Erica was one of them, actually, but also college presidents and vice presidents and community college system leaders. We asked them to describe what they saw as the need and how we could help. And here are a few of the things that we heard. Most recognize the importance of leveraging expertise of specific partners. For instance, community organizations may be better suited to meet students' psychosocial needs. But we also know that they're not always knocking on the college door. And so they really wanted to know, how do we begin those conversations? There was a strong desire expressed for us to focus on the how, not just who. And so our thinking evolved beyond kind of our initial concepts of ecosystem mapping to a tool that can actually result in stronger partnerships. And the need was surfaced to help colleges identify roles different individuals may play. So with this tool, we aim to help colleges identify opportunities for partnership that leverage existing relationships. Some of the examples discussed were how to engage employers, how to develop partnerships with local high schools, and how to work with community partners to support food and housing security. We took what we've learned from those interviews and we developed the Ecosystem Partnership Tool. This tool is designed to guide community colleges through an inquiry and strategic planning process to develop and strengthen community partnerships. The purpose is to define a key challenge or a few and examine potential partnerships within your ecosystem that could collectively address the problem. Each stage of the process includes questions that can be answered individually and then considered in aggregate, where they can be used as discussion prompts for cross-functional teams to engage in collaborative dialogue. At the end of the process, colleges will have an actionable plan that they can implement to increase partnership. And this slide gives you an overview of the stages of the process, developing partnerships that the tool guides you through. So during the reflection stage, you might consider what challenges students in your colleges are facing that you believe could be better addressed in collaborative partnership with community organizations in your ecosystem to achieve a greater impact. As you kind of engage, we go back one slide, there you go. So the next stage is priority setting. And so you'll be identifying those gaps and considering what should be prioritized. What more would you like to do but can't because you don't currently have sufficient resources or the capacity and skills to do that? In the discovery stage, you're mapping current and potential connections to organizations within your community that are aligned with those priorities, and you're identifying opportunities for new partnerships. Then in the analysis and selection stage, we're really challenging assumptions. So you're identifying which partnerships are most viable, which you're going to pursue most immediately, and analyzing what are the benefits both for your college, but also for the community organization and partnering with you. In the planning and outreach stage, you're taking those initial steps to make the connections, considering who at your institution should serve on the team to meet with a prospective ecosystem partner and engage in collaboration. And then in the next stage of the process, co-visioning and collaboration, colleges engage with partners to develop shared agendas based on their common vision and defined values. Explore key issues like considering commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, how that impacts the challenge you're addressing, and how DEI strategies are operationalized in the solution. And the key part of the action planning is outlining SMART goals. So we probably all know those are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely that can continue to guide colleges and their partners as they collaborate to address challenges. So as an example of this, for the initial stages of identifying challenges and exploring partnerships with community-based organizations, you might consider, are there prospective students that you're not reaching? Community organizations may be serving those students, and partnership can provide equitable access to diverse talent, those that were previously disconnected. Are students getting lost in the complicated process of applying and financial aid? Community organizations can provide much needed support for students in navigating those processes. They can also continue to support students after they're enrolled, providing mechanisms for increased engagement and assisting students in overcoming challenges that would otherwise cause them to stop out. JFF can facilitate this process for an institution or college teams within a region. And our colleague Charlotte Cahill is going to walk a bit more through what that looks like for asset mapping, which is related to the discovery stage of the ecosystem partnership process. Charlotte, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stacy, and hi everyone. It's nice to be talking with you this morning. So, as you know, as Stacy said, asset mapping is a process that JFF has led in many places, and just wanted to walk you through a little bit about how we think about this process and why we think it's a valuable one. So broadly speaking, we, think of asset mapping as having a few different key steps that include tapping the expertise of stakeholders, both within an institution, but also more broadly in a region, getting a handle on what are the relevant policies and programs and plans that may already be in place. I think something that we know is that people often have lovely reports and strategic plans that they have developed, and the extent to which those are being implemented may vary from place to place. And so part of what we try to do is look at what's out there and then really talk to stakeholders about their understanding of where that's being implemented, if it's being implemented, what are some of the challenges and obstacles to implementation. We also look to analyze data, which can include both outcomes data and information about regional labor markets, as we try to understand how to ensure that students are getting through post-secondary education and into high wage and high demand careers. Once we've kind of gathered up all of that data and information, we analyze and synthesize it and produce generally a report reflecting back what we've heard. And then a critical component of this is sharing what we've learned with stakeholders in the process. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail step by step through the process in just a minute, but wanted to take a moment to say why I keep emphasizing that asset mapping is in fact a process and not just kind of a result at the end of things. So yes, there's a report, and getting to the report is, in our experience, almost as important as what we end up with at the end. And so, asset mapping is really critical, first of all, for understanding and leveraging existing work and programs, and sort of aligned with that point, reducing and eliminating duplicative efforts. And really the goal here is to save everyone a little bit of time. I think we have all been in the experience of having the same meeting 4 different times with slightly different groups of people. And part of what we're trying to do here is really think about how we can move away from that and instead align and leverage existing work. The asset mapping process also, through particularly conversations we have, allows us to assess sort of gaps, the strengths, the challenges, as we think about program development or implementation. And critically, and this is the really key bit of it being a process rather than a product, asset mapping is itself a strategy for building engagement and buy-in among stakeholders. So it gives folks an opportunity to sort of say up front how a proposed program or initiative or effort aligns with what they're already doing, or not, and provides some space to think about how we could get to better alignment so that we are instead, right, really taking advantage of work that's already happening rather than asking people to roll out some new thing on top of their day jobs. And so to that point, we think considering this as sort of an exercise in identifying assets is really critical. There are some ways in which what I'm talking about, right, may sound pretty similar to a needs assessment or a SWOT analysis or something along those lines. And for sure, there are similarities. And the sort of asset-based focus here is really critical in setting up the work to come effectively, because it really is identifying ways that people can contribute and empowering them to think about how to do so, rather than coming back to folks with a long list of things that it has been decided that they should implement on top of what they're already doing. So to walk you through the process in just a little bit more detail here, we think of this as sort of a series of steps that overlap a little bit, but really begin by figuring out what is the goal of asset mapping. What are the key questions that we need to address? What do people already know? Certainly, it is never our goal to come in and tell people things that they already know. That seems like not a good use of anyone's time. So it's really trying to better understand, what do we need to learn through this process? And that will then have an effect in terms of how we think about and frame future steps in the process, including the kind of next step of desk-based research. So again, we want to look at strategic plans, reports, analyze existing data, figure out what we don't know, and also really identify key programs and initiatives that we think are kind of building blocks that can be leveraged or serve as a foundation for this work. And so get a good list of what's already out there going, and then use that as the starting point for a list of stakeholders to engage. So understanding who's already doing this work, who's doing work adjacent to this work, and let's get a better understanding from them of their perspective on sort of, the efforts to come. And the other piece of this, circling back to the question of buy-in, is we have found it to be very effective to use a stakeholder engagement process and solicit feedback and ideas from people who are maybe not as enthused about sort of the process or what we're hoping to learn, as a way of bringing them in, giving them some voice, and really taking seriously their concerns and ideas for how we can do things better. So once we have that list of folks to interview, we then conduct a series of structured interviews with different stakeholders. So we usually have an interview protocol that focuses on both getting a handle in general on what folks are up to, and then digging into some of those key questions that we identified as things that we hope to address through the process. So once we've done our desk-based research, we've interviewed stakeholders, the next piece of this is to really take a step back, think about what we've learned, and think about how to synthesize that in a way that helps make sense of everything. And that can include, right, elevating work or initiatives that maybe didn't come up when we put together our initial list of things that we thought were relevant. It includes surfacing concern we heard from stakeholders during the asset mapping process and ideas for how to move forward. And so we take all of that, really try to reflect back what we hear, and then also develop a series of recommendations for what's next. And I think here, in this developing recommendations stage is a place where I might pause for a minute and talk about kind of why JFF might do this rather than folks doing it internally. And I think one of the benefits that we have in this process is that we are kind of a neutral third party that can come in. We know that there can be, some politics and related considerations as we think about what it looks like to roll out these big efforts and initiatives. So we can sort of step in and make recommendations that we hope are seen as neutral and credible. But the other piece of this is that we can provide political cover for folks in making these recommendations. And so, it is often the case that, I lead an asset mapping process in a community that where I am not engaged all the time. And so I think from everybody's perspective, it is better for people to be unhappy with me than to be unhappy with their colleagues. So that is also something that we can do here as part of developing recommendations. Once we've kind of thought about all of this, it's then really critical to share out what we've learned with all of the stakeholders who were engaged in the process, and to think too about who wasn't engaged in the initial process, but this may be an opportunity to bring them into some of the thinking and next steps. So very often, again, we have this report, and very often sharing results looks a little bit like providing a presentation and an overview. And again, JFF, sometimes makes this presentation. This is something that we sort of determine on a case-by-case basis, depending on whom we're hoping to engage and what we're hoping to accomplish through sharing results. And then our hope is that sharing results and the recommendations that we develop lead into the creation of an action plan that can really help to jumpstart the work and engage key stakeholders in developing and moving that plan forward. So again, very often, part of our recommendations include the sort of making some suggestions about maybe who should be on first for what as we think about this work moving forward. So just to kind of wrap up here with a little bit of a discussion of what's come out of all of this on the other end. So we have certainly seen folks use this as the foundation for launching a new strategic planning process. So sort of even a step beyond action planning, maybe, frequently one of the things we discover through the process is everyone says, oh yes, we have a strategic plan and we don't think it's the right strategic plan and folks aren't really engaged in it. So really kind of using the process to say, okay, so what we need to do is get to a new strategic plan that can move the work forward. Another thing that often comes out of it, particularly as we look across regions and communities in the asset mapping process, is very often there are sort of tensions between, in the work as we try to work across stakeholder groups. So that could be sort of thinking about conversations between educators and employers who are very often speaking entirely different languages, wanting to move at entirely different speeds on doing things, maybe seeking somewhat different outcomes. And so looking to intermediary organizations that can really guide the work. And so that can include, so I think, for example, of asset mapping that we did in Delaware. And one of the things we heard from every stakeholder that we spoke to was that Delaware Technical Community College is a wonderful partner to everyone. And everyone we talked to in these interviews couldn't stop gushing about how much they enjoyed working with Del Tech. And we said, oh, maybe Del Tech would be a good intermediary, right? As we think about this, because they do have the partnerships and can bring folks together. We've also used asset mapping to launch cross-sector leadership teams and to support shared data and metrics. And then the other piece of this is, as we get all of these different pieces in place, asset mapping can also be used to spur conversations about how do we braid funding to move forward together as a group of stakeholders in this work, and think about aligning resources to initiatives rather than to programs or organizations or institutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rachel, who can talk in a little bit more detail about some examples of what this work has looked like.
Hi, thanks very much, Charlotte. So I am excited to talk now a bit more about partnerships in action through a project called Boost. This is an initiative that was launched by the Kresge Foundation in late 2019. JFF serves as the learning and management partner. We also work closely with Equal Measure as our evaluation partner. And we are working with 6 partnerships between community colleges and human service organizations. And by human service organization, that runs the gamut between, we have some multi-service organizations, we have some Head Start programs, we have a Catholic charity, so it's a variety of organizations that fall under that heading of human services. And all 6 are really focused on programmatic changes and systems changes that enhance economic mobility for families in their communities. There are 6 core tenets for the initiative, which we can go to now. I won't go into detail on all of them, but I wanted to highlight that one of them is certainly partnership, and specifically, deep collaboration across the core partners, as well as other community partners, depending on the community, with the end goal really being that, on the one hand, more community college students access the supports they need to achieve their goals. And at the same time, so that more of the clients of the human services organization can access those educational pathways that are, the on-ramps to economic mobility. And so that I think a key point here is just recognizing that each of these organizations brings immense strengths, and they have limitations on what they're able to do. And so we're trying to bring together the best of each organization to create more seamless pathways for everything. Each of the cities that we'll go to those in a sec, has their own approach to implementing these core tenets. And I think those approaches are evolving over time, depending on local context. So these partnerships are all at the co-visioning and collaboration stage that Stacy talked about earlier. They have largely identified a shared agenda. They have a shared vision for what they want to accomplish and the challenges that they're trying to solve, the target populations they're focused on, and are starting now to implement their program designs. That implementation has been, of course, impacted by COVID, but they are all now finally getting to the stage of being able to enroll individual clients and students into programs. And so that shared agenda, that collaboration, the constant communication, that's really what is enabling partnerships to transform the experience of students and clients. Stacy and I are both coaches for some of the communities, and it's always really both very clear and very exciting to see when we talk to them, just how deep that level of collaboration is, the way that they talk about, they really are finishing each other's sentences in many cases. It's clear that they are connecting very regularly. And I think that relationship piece that, Stacy flagged that on the very first slide, is there in all of these cases. So I'll share a little bit now about what those partnerships look like in action. In this slide, so I listed the core partner in each city, and I added one, and then I have one aspect of the partnership in action. And when I initially put the slides together, I was thinking I would go through each city, and then I was reflecting on it later and thinking it made more sense to just talk about the key themes that I see across all 6 cities. So one common element, and this is maybe what we tend to think about first when we think about partnerships, is simply that the partnerships help connect learners with additional support. So that could include case management supports. Often human services organizations can provide a deeper level of case management than is available through advisors or on-campus services. They can often provide financial assistance for students or access to benefits. They may be able to support childcare access. They may be able to support transportation access. But what we're seeing too is that there's a lot of other ways that the partnerships are playing out in real time. So one that I think is important is simply that partnerships can help colleges serve populations that otherwise might never enroll in college in the first place. So these are individuals who would benefit from the programs that you offer and may never find their way to your door. So for example, we see in both Portland and Syracuse, the partnerships are working to target Head Start parents. So, the human service organizations run Head Start programs. There are children in those programs who obviously have parents who have an interest in potentially, improving their own economic mobility and finding better career paths. And so those partnerships are able to directly target that population of Head Start parents. In Hartford, we see the partnership is really helping the college get directly into the neighborhoods and zip codes that are most underserved currently by the community or by the college. And they're able to do that because the Catholic Charities is a trusted partner and they have really deep roots in those neighborhoods and are able to engage residents of those neighborhoods and get them involved into the program. We see the same happening in Queens, where Common Point Queens, as a multi-service organization that provides a wide range of supports, including career coaching, including child care, including after-school care, they have strong connections to the community. And so it can be a better entry point for individuals who might not otherwise have thought about enrolling in LaGuardia. Another thing we're seeing across multiple cities right now that I think is really exciting is that the partners are bringing together frontline staff. So that could be coaches, case managers, and advisors across the organizations, and sometimes even other partners in their community. And they are providing cross-training and peer learning. And what's exciting about this is that it helps everybody that is involved in a potential student's life to develop a common language for supporting those learners and a common vocabulary. So, when one person is talking about goal setting, that they're talking about goal setting the same way, whether you are at the human services organization or whether you're at the college. And and in addition, those relationships across the organization. So by participating in, for example, a community of practice, those individuals know each other. So in that case, it's much more personal than just saying, oh, you should go connect with this organization. It is Joe at the Head Start program calling up his friend Maria at the college and saying, I have someone who might be a great fit for this program. And those personal connections, along with the shared vocabulary, I think make a big difference in making a more seamless experience for individuals as they move through those programs. The other piece that I'm hearing more and more is just that the human services partners can provide a level of insight on their clients that colleges may not necessarily be able to access on their own. So these partners know, they know their clients' lives. They know the challenges they're facing. They know their goals. They know their dreams. They know their families, and so they know how to reach these individuals. They know what information is going to resonate when you're talking about, what educational opportunities are available. They know what might motivate them. They know what barriers they might face. They know what might be scary. And these organizations often bring really strong histories of getting client feedback and input into program design. And so what we're seeing in a lot of cases, and I've seen this especially in Baltimore and Syracuse, is that the Human Services Organization is able to help the college really design their pathways and especially their on-ramps with the needs of the population that they're trying to reach. So that might be as simple as saying, hey, this group doesn't tend to respond well to social media. They tend to respond well to getting flyers in their kids' backpacks, or this population really is struggling with access to technology, and fully online program may not be the best fit right now, or this population is juggling childcare. Let's think about what we could do in evening hours. And that insight into their clients can be incredibly helpful for the college that's trying to think about, how do I reach new populations and how do I design programs that will meet them where they are. The last thing I'll mention is that a lot of the partnerships are thinking about data systems and how do you track student referrals? How do you share information about those individuals who might interact with multiple programs across the community? The data systems piece is certainly tricky and a work in progress, as I'm sure many of you know if you are similarly working on data systems. But the benefit of this, of course, is that, for one thing, individuals are not sharing information more than once. They're able to provide their stories when they interact with the Human Services Organization, and then relevant information can be shared with the college. And it can also provide great insights for the partnership about how individuals are moving through systems. Are there partners where there's a lot of people who are getting referred to the college? Are those students successful once they enroll? Are there partners who only send a few students? What happens to those students? And all of that information, combined with the partnership itself, can help the coalition think about redesigning their programs and thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to tweak our programs to make them better, to better meet these learners where they are. So that's a little bit about where things are right now. It's a really exciting project and would love to share more, and of course would love to find ways to get the actual partnerships in the room with all of you to share lessons. I imagine there's a lot that you can share with them as well about what you're learning from your partnerships. So I will pause there. I think I'm turning it back to Stacy at this point.
Actually, Rachel, it's Dave
Oh, sorry.
Altstad, also at JFF. I think I'm going to take it from here, primarily to facilitate questions that might be coming through, and I have a few that I've teed up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can actually see if there's questions. I realized that after I was sharing, I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to monitor the questions, but let's see. So as I scroll through, let me just ask a few questions of the JFF team, and this will give folks an opportunity to think things, what they may want to ask. So Rachel, I wanted to ask you, just in terms of these community partnerships, could you describe more what you understand to be some of the first steps that they have taken to develop a collaboration between the college and the CBO? Who met, what did they talk about, that kind of co-visioning shared agenda process? Can you talk more about that?
Sure, and it certainly varies a lot in each of these communities. Many of them already had some connections in place prior to applying for the Boost grant, although they've been able to deepen those partnerships immensely. A couple of concrete things I think we've heard are really, first of it's just honestly meeting regularly and talking and bringing together diverse groups from both organizations to learn more about each other's organizations. And so something we've heard, is that, it's one thing to have one person from each organization that collaborates regularly, but that doesn't necessarily trickle down always to the rest of the organization. And so a couple of them have talked about, doing sort of virtual tours, or, in non-COVID times, doing actual in-person tours and bringing a team from, for example, Common Point, Queens over to LaGuardia to get a tour and just understand, like, here's how the college works. Like those, if you work at a college, you understand the intricacies and the ins and outs of like what's a bursar and what's a registrar and all these things. The folks who work at community-based organization may not understand all that. And similarly, those who work at a college may not understand the ins and outs of what happens at your organization. So I think some of that just ongoing info sharing is an important first step. And then thinking about sort of where do they have, common needs, common interests, who are they serving that, maybe the same people, but, they're serving them in different ways. And so it's starting to do a lot of that, like just really starting with sharing and try to build understanding, and then digging into, okay, well, what are the problems that our community is facing and how can we work together on that?
Yeah, a lot of what you mentioned there echoes some steps that we described in the ecosystem partnership tool about information gathering and things of that nature. On the other end of the spectrum, and I know that this is something that you all have built into the process, I'm looking at Erica's question around partnership sustainability. So if you're going to embark on something, how do you ensure that it can sustain and scale over time? I'd love to hear what you have to say on that, Rachel, the conversations that are being had there, and I'm going to follow up with Charlotte next a bit to hear more about some of the braided funding, because I think it relates.
Yeah, we had a webinar with our cohort back in the fall where we had some presenters from Philadelphia who talked a little bit about how they've grown and scaled their partnership over time. And in many ways, it's a very organic process. They talked about how, by virtue of slowly building the relationship, they were able to, identify new opportunities for funding as they came up. And so, for example, the community-based organization might say, hey, I just learned about this grant. It makes sense to partner with a college on this. Let's go in for it together. Same thing might happen on the community college side. And so it was a little bit of like, because they had that relationship, when opportunities arose on both sides, they were able to think about how can we build on what we've already done and expand out in these new ways. And I've actually heard similar things happening in Queens, where, LaGuardia has been able to say, hey, we actually had a really good success in the early phases of this partnership with our community health worker program. Here's an opportunity because we have an employer partner who wants to develop, a phlebotomy program. Let's talk again to Common Point Queens and say, how can we build on that? So there's not a science to it. I think it, again, is like really building on the strength of that relationship and the ability, once you see a partnership that's beyond, I think, sort of more of that transactional, like, oh, you have childcare, let's get you access to childcare. When you're starting to see the breadth of what that partner can do, you start to notice other things that come up and say, oh, this is another place where we could collaborate. And because each organization has sort of different funders that they can access, you start to find more opportunities to bring in new resources that might not otherwise be there.
Such a key point. I just wanted to echo that, getting beyond the kind of transactional aspect and really thinking about how you build and sustain a true and deep partnership with the community-based organization in the college. So important. Charlotte, I know you're still there. Wanted to bring you back into this conversation, maybe in part to talk about that kind of partnership sustainability and getting back to some of the pieces you mentioned of what's come out of it through the asset mapping process.
Yeah, absolutely. And, might start by building a little bit on what Rachel was saying. So by way of very brief context, the sort of subject matter of most of my work is developing college and career pathways that sort of help students get from high school to and through post-secondary education and then into high wage, high demand careers. So much of my work is really about supporting partnerships among K-12 and post-secondary educators and employers. And so to the point about partnership sustainability, one of the really critical things that I've seen is the need to make sure that everyone sees the value add of this pathways work in their work, right? And so from a high school perspective, we know because we have research that pathways are really good for boosting graduation rates and helping schools meet all of the college and career readiness indicators that they have to meet in their state accountability systems. And then at a community college level, we know that this work boosts enrollment and boosts completion, while at the same time reducing the need for developmental education. So that's kind of, what stake the colleges very often have in this. And then, on the employer side, and this one is where it's really critical, because often I will say I want to talk to an employer and they will send me to talk to their, community engagement, corporate social responsibility person. And that is not at all who I want to talk to. I want to talk to their HR person about how we're building a talent pipeline for their company, because that's how we get them engaged, right? The corporate social responsibility person is not core to their business functions. And so it doesn't help sustain the partnership over the long haul. So would just say, once, you get to that point of having all of the partners understand how this is supporting their organizations and institutional goals, rather than being a nice thing to do, just, because we like to work with people in our community, then it really helps get into, to finally answer Dave's question about braided funding, it helps to set the stage for that kind of initiative, right? Because once the partners have reached a point where they say, doing this work in this partnership is how I am achieving my organization's individual organizational goals, that is what then enables situations in which people sort of will come into these conversations about partnership and say, right, we have the following resources that we can put on the table to support this. And once you get all of the partners coming together to do that, then what I've seen in really successful instances of braided funding is an effort for all of the partners to come together and allocate funding in a way that aligns to their action plan and to activities and objectives in their action plan, rather than allocating funding by partner organization. But all of that really proceeds from an understanding that the partnership is benefiting all partners.
That's such
I
a,
think,
yeah, go
sorry, I
ahead,
just want to
Rachel.
jump in and say, and I think the trust piece and the relationship piece, because you have to move from a mindset of, we're operating in scarce resources, so therefore I'm going to, try to get as many resources for myself, to a mindset of recognizing that, yes, we all have scarce resources, but we're also all trying to achieve common goals, and it makes more sense to pool our resources rather than to try to think about our own needs first.
Excellent point, Rachel. Well, I wanted to bring Stacy back into the conversation just to talk a little bit more about what's coming next with JFF's rollout of the ecosystem partnership tool. And we can also talk a little bit about what's coming next with JFF's post-secondary network and a series of virtual events that we're undertaking, which is actually going to spotlight Michigan, one of them coming up, looking into partnerships. Stacy, do you have you want to say a few more words about the next steps with the ecosystem partnership tool?
Sure. Yep, I was also trying to type a link into the chat window there. So we are inviting, let's see. Yeah, just kind of getting some behind the scenes, but want to make sure that that link was correct. But we are going to have the ability to invite you all to participate and to use the ecosystem partnership tool if that sounds like something that would be helpful for you. And I know Precious is going to talk to you guys some more about that opportunity. But if you are interested, Dave, I know, put up our email addresses. So please feel free to reach out. You can email myself or Dave, or certainly, reach us through Erica or Precious. But we would love for you all to participate. We're going to have an introductory webinar that really kind of walks through, it in a lot more detail, the specifics of the tool and best practices for using that. And we'll actually have a kind of a beta group that'll be iterative. So we'll have some discussion times, and we'll have opportunities for you all to provide feedback to us about what, how it's working best. If you experience any kind of, challenges or questions, and that'll just help us learn and continue to develop it. Because our goal is really to help colleges, as they, again, partner and establish partnerships with these community organizations. So, yeah, we're really excited to find, continued opportunities to work with all of you. And Erica, I don't know if you want to say, say anything about that opportunity.
No, that sounds great, Stacy. I think the link that you had posted didn't work for me, so I tried to send another link in the chat. But I know that those of you who use Canvas on your campus, this can be a frustrating cycle of trying to get onto those things. So just reach out to Precious and I if you're having any trouble. I guess one comment that I just have is sometimes it can feel overwhelming to do this type of asset mapping work, but I think small bites at a time. And I think that JFF really understands that and is leading this work in that way. So I think particularly if you have community organizations who you think would be strong partners, this is a great opportunity for colleges. So thank you for inviting us.
I'd just like to add that the opportunity that JFF presents is really taking the guesswork out of next steps and what questions to ask, and when to ask those questions, and what to look for when identifying community-based organizations that can meet the needs of your institution. So if this is of interest to you, it is available. And as Erica shared, she and I can definitely connect you if you have any questions or want to learn more. We are swimming right along with our agenda today. If you have any additional questions, it looks like Dave has shared his email in the chat. This will be made available along with the recording, so you guys can feel free to connect with them. We are scheduled to take a break next in our agenda. So we are looking at coming back here at 10 a.m. I hope you guys don't mind an extra 5 minutes in your break time. So I will leave you to enjoy your break, and we'll see you all back at 10 a.m. And thank you, JFF, for joining us today. Welcome back, everyone. I have 10 a.m. So we are going to jump back in and resume the latter half of today's workshop focused on building community partnerships. Okay, and as we resume, I just wanted to set the stage. So we'll be again talking about community partnerships, what partnerships look like, how to establish those partnerships, and then really ironing out the actionable steps that go along with that. So here I have a slide that talks about MyBridges, because MyBridges gives us an opportunity to really hone in on the community-based organizations that are available in our community. And so in talking about MyBridges, I want to make sure that you all know that as much as it is a tool of for students and users to identify resources in their area and public benefits, it's also an opportunity for you all to identify the community organizations in your area that you could add to your asset map or add to your list of organizations that might match the goals of your organization, the goals of your institution, and the needs of your students. So I just wanted to preface that. Okay. So let's take things back a minute to the Trellis survey that was mentioned earlier. Here again is the question from the sample set from 2019. And this question is regarding housing insecurity and getting an understanding of what the insecurity is that would cause a student to experience housing insecurity. You can take the data that you receive from the Trellis survey to better understand the population of students who have housing insecurity, and that could be due to difficulty paying for rent, for example. So with that in mind, you then can go to MyBridges to locate an organization that can help with this specific need. And I appreciate MyBridges because it really lightens the load of one person or one small group of college professionals having to be the keeper of all information that relates to community organizations. It also empowers others to be able to locate the resources for students as well. More importantly, it allows for you all to be able to be the experts in your areas instead of having to be the experts about community-based resources. And MyBridges can be the gateway for community organizations to do that for you. Some of you may be familiar with what the MyBridges portal looks like, and some of you may not. So the illustrations that you see here, I hope helps paint a picture of what that portal looks like once you go into it. Everyone has the option to create a MyBridges account free of charge. So when you set up a free account, this is what you'll see in the screen. When looking at this from the lens of establishing or identifying a healthy community organization to partner with, you'll first explore resources. And as you explore resources, it will then kick you to the next image on the right, which outlines or gives you the opportunity to categorize or select the option that best fits the resource that you are looking for. After you locate the resource that would meet your need or the needs of your students, MyBridges will naturally populate results of organizations that meet that criteria. So here, for example, we have Mid-Michigan as a resource that could meet the housing needs of students. And then again, taking it back to the Trellis sample question, if a student is struggling with paying for rent, this specific organization has been outlined as a resource to help meet that basic need. So after you click that resource, you have the option to saving that resource to your MyBridges portal, your MyBridges account, to access later, because life might happen and you might not be able to do that desk-based research that JFF mentioned. So if that's the case, you can save it. When you do come back to it, this you can pull up the resource, and this is just an example. So pulling up this resource, I clicked on how they can help, and they populated a list of things that they can help their constituents with. And housing would be the resource that we are specifically looking at. So when you select the organization and learn about the services and identify opportunities for partnership, I have outlined here some questions or things to consider when looking at this organization, when looking at another organization, questions to have in mind as you are identifying whether or not this is a partnership you want to learn more about or begin to connect with. So think about the organization's service and if it aligns with your strategic needs. And when doing your desk-based research about this organization, think about how this partnership will impact your students And when looking at an organization for partnership and then thinking back on the presentation from JFF, it could be helpful to look at your asset map and remember the 4 components of an asset, because we're looking for assets, things that would complement the work that is already taking place. Or you could think about it as, we already have a dedicated person who is supporting students in navigating housing. So we could connect this person with the community-based organization to better help them or to lighten the load for them. So it's not just one person who is only supporting students with housing. There's an organization that does that. In our panel discussion, there will be some more information that's shared about how a community-based organization exists to serve its community. So if students at your institution have needs, there's a community organization that has already shared that it is their organization's mission to support the students. So I don't want you all to think that the expectation is for you all to do all of the work. My best is in place to help lessen or lighten the load of feeling like you have to. So connecting with community organizations is one way in which the load can be lightened for you, so you all aren't having to be the end all be all of all resources when there are community-based organizations to help you with that. That didn't take as long as I thought it would at all. So there's a panel discussion.
Precious, I'm wondering if folks have questions about that, or I've tried to, this is Erica, sorry. I've, put in a lot of different zip codes and tried to find things. I know, Precious, you and I talk with folks over at MDHHS and with the United Way that supports the My 211. And I'm wondering if anybody's had anybody gone through this or any kind of questions. We're always happy to pass along feedback to those organizations as well. I know that I have done some research in certain areas of the state, and there are definitely resource gaps out there where there's just not enough coverage in those organizations. And I'm wondering if other folks have had the same experience.
It's Katie from MCSS. I'm also wondering if any of you want to share any success stories. I find, I'm a little disconnected from this works, but I learn something new every time I get to hear you guys talking about what you're doing to support our students. And I'm curious about those of you who have used this successfully and how it's helped your students connect, and if you are willing to share any of those success stories.
This is Dinah Shaler from Mott Community College. One of the things that we did that I thought was helpful, because right now students qualify for SNAP benefits if they're enrolled in a CTE program. And what was happening with DHHS is they were having a hard time getting that verified. They couldn't find the right person because there's a form that needs to be completed. And I have a friend that works at DHHS, and she reached out to me and asked me who it was, and I said it was me. So now they're just emailing me all of it, and then I'm able to verify it within seconds, and then they are able to get the benefits for the students. So I think that's a barrier that has been in place for a while, is because the students have to have some sort of verification to get the benefits, and they're not always sure, especially since we're all virtual, people can't always scan a form or sign a form or something. So now that they have me, they're just very happy with that. So I think that's one of the successes that came out of it, is just having that collaborative relationship with them, and working back and forth led to an easier way to do something. And they were very thankful for that. So.
Great.
Thanks for sharing that, Dinah. I'm curious to know if anyone has been able to build a relationship with a community organization and well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with the panel. But I know that My Bridges is one way of identifying an organization. Is there another way that you all have found a way to build those partnerships? And I am getting ahead of myself, but I'm still going to ask.
Hi, this is Beverly Ambrose from Oakland Community College. I'm having technical difficulties, so I apologize you don't see my face. And I think this is what you're referring to. One in particular that we have partnered with, and we have, I think, done a really good job is Oakland Literacy Council. And so Oakland Literacy Council is an organization in Oakland County that provides a lot of literacy for those adults who may not be able to be college ready. And so in doing so, our partnership with them, they have a referral form on their webpage as well as our counselors. And so if a student comes in and is not at the level to begin some college courses, they offer free tutoring and free resources to bring them up to that level. And so that referral form has really assisted on their webpage as well as with our counselors to assist with our community in building up their literacy. And they're now working on the numeracy piece because of the math anxiety that so many individuals have, especially with the Reconnect program and the Futures for Frontliners. So they are really assisting and partners along with the resources that we have within the institution. So that was a good partnership, in my opinion, to assist our students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, Beverly. And it's helpful to hear that it is helpful for you and your colleagues, but it's also helpful for the students and the community-based organization. So it sounds like it was a win-win-win on all fronts, which is what we're hoping you will experience when connecting with a community organization. Now, it's a partnership doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that is developed over time, but My Bridges could be a starting point for identifying the best place to begin with that connection, so that you all are able to do what you do best and not have to bear your role and job expectations and responsibilities with all of the needs that can come with a student who may not have economic stability. It's being able to leverage that with a community organization. I know the panel has a lot to offer about the steps that exist within connecting with an organization, from where do you start to how do you maintain the relationship, to the perspective that a community organization brings in with talking about establishing a partnership, which is a voice and a perspective we haven't yet had in the work of MyBest. And so I'll invite Priya to jump in and facilitate our panel discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Precious. And I think this has already been such an inspiring morning around what are we already doing in putting the community in community colleges, and how can we broaden and deepen that kind of solidarity in this work. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes before introducing the panel to just also offer a couple of perspectives on the big why of engaging community partners in this kind of way. And I want to relate it back to the student experience and the student impact. For a long time, we have had community partners be involved, sometimes in the form of off-campus referrals, where we would see that a student would benefit from a particular service in the community, and then offer that referral, cross our fingers, and hope that if the student didn't come back, they got what they needed. And so I think what we're trying to do here is a more proactive and intentional approach to structuring that luck and bringing the service closer to the student. So is there a way that we can deepen the engagement with our community partners so that students get the service when they need it in the way that they need it? And so this impact on how does this offer students the just-in-time support to keep the momentum of their educational path from entering and staying and completing their programs. That's the kind of goal as far as the student experience and the student impact that we're trying to create. And what's really heartening, as we heard from our JFF colleagues, as we heard from Dinah, as we heard from other folks, is that there's already so much happening in Michigan. And in your own institution, there are already places where there are different levels of community partnerships. And so the question is, how do we take stock of that through an approach like asset mapping that lets us see where we can continue to build? Or how do we acknowledge, as Precious mentioned, this last year's worth of work that might identify other gaps where we want to start launching and building the relationship work as well? And so if we think about it from the student's perspective and the student experience, what this does say, and I really want to underscore what Precious says, this doesn't mean that our faculty colleagues and our staff peers have to become experts in every aspect of service provision, but that we know how to be able to connect students based on where they are to where on campus or off campus those supports could be as well. And so with that in mind, I'm just really, really thrilled. Precious and I had the joy of meeting our panelists a little bit earlier to hear what they'd like to share. And even though we're going to try to give you just a tasting platter, if you will, in the next half hour, 40 minutes, I also know and believe that there are so many stories like this, just from what Dinah shared, what Beverly shared, that you're already having at your colleges. So really leverage and think about what you know to work at your institution and see from these different stories what might be considerations that might, amplify and elevate the work that you do as well. With that in mind, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Priya. I work with the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement. I do a lot of work around the intersection of guided pathways, making sure that students can get in and on their path and through their academic and educational path, and how that intersects with the real life challenges that can derail even the best intentions and the best designs at the institution. And so with that, I want to invite, we're just going to do a little round robin. We have about 40 minutes together. We're going to have each panelist take just a few minutes and give you a very TLDR kind of summary of why they are talking about the particular partnership or the particular community approach that they're taking and what it looks like. And then we'll have a little bit more of a group discussion on what they've learned and what they're looking forward to doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and start passing the baton to Amy at Mid-Michigan. Amy, I know you're here. If you want to unmute yourself.
I'm here. Thanks, Priya.
Hi.
Hello. I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat for those who want to check out the website that I'm going to be referencing there. So that should be in the chat now. My name is Amy Gothi. I'm the Director of Student Wellness and Equity at Mid-Michigan College. My position has definitely evolved over several years, and at this point in time, the type of work that I'm doing is developing programming around student basic needs and also organizing awareness campaigns for our campus related to our compliance needs. So things on alcohol and other drugs, Title IX, Clery, those sorts of things. The reason for the creation of my position was really because as our teams were looking out into the community and also looking at what was happening with our students, it was determined that we really had a need to have someone focused really specifically on finding basic need access for students. So, some of those numbers that we were looking at and talking about as Precious and Priya and the rest of the team and I were chatting, one of the things that I was really looking at and reflecting back to Mid was some of the ALICE plus poverty numbers in our area. The state average is about 43%, and the communities that we serve are over that number. So for instance, Clare County is at 55%, Gladwin is at 47%, and Isabella is at 51%. So we knew there was definitely some basic need gaps in our community, and that was coming in with our students as well. So I know we're going to do some deep dives with some other panelists. I have several programs, so I'm just really going to kind of give a broad overview of who was involved in those partnerships. So the first one that I want to definitely talk about is our collegiate recovery program, We worked with 1016 Recovery Network over the last 2 or 3 years, actually, to really get this program launched. So in talking with them and working with them on some local community initiatives, I was really able to build a partnership. We would offer lunch and learns where MID would provide the space, 1016 would really provide the content, and then we'd find a community partner to bring the food in, and then so we could do lunch and learns that way. So kind of through doing that work, we would have side conversations about what the needs of MID students were. They already had a program at CMU and at Ferris State for collegiate recovery. So they brought me to a table for the Northern Michigan Opioid Response Coalition. And through working with them, we were able to have the collegiate recovery program for MID written into that grant. And so that was how we were basically able to get the funding to do this program. Sustainability wise, it is a little challenging because it was a 2-year grant. So we're looking at what our next steps are and what our options are there. But I think we will strategically make that continue to happen for our students because of the substance use rates and overdose rates in our community. We also partner with Fostering Success Michigan. So through doing that work, we're working on developing best supports for students who come from or students with foster care experience. We also work with the health department to offer on-campus STD and HIV testing for those that are interested. We work with CMU's Center for Community Counseling and Development to offer free telemental health to our students right now. We also partner with our local transportation providers. So we have Isabella County and Clare County. They allow me basically to borrow bus passes from them to sell and then return whatever we don't sell, and then they bill us for what we do sell. And within that, students are able to use their financial aid to buy bulk bus passes if they're using public transportation, so that will save them money in the long run. We also have a food pantry that was kind of being born as I was coming into this position. So our AVP of Student Success, Carrie Keiss-Toner, created the food pantry on campus, and I believe we worked with Community Compassion Network to really get that up and running because there were some issues around who that was being funneled through and 503C issues and things around missions. So we had to kind of partner with them to figure out how we could make that work to have a 503C status for this specific food pantry. So that was definitely a project that took a lot longer than we had hoped, but it is part of the process to make sure that you have all of those things in order so that you can make sure that you can continue to bring that food in and it remains sustainable. Beyond that, there are some more resources on the website. So I have a listing of community assistance resources. Those are things that I check up on every semester just to make sure the links are still working, make sure that the phone numbers are still correct. And if we have new resource providers, we add those in so that there's a really quick list that we can get to students. And we also definitely encourage them to use 211 or MyBridges. With COVID, it's been a little challenging to post community flyers. So when community agencies send me their information in a flyer, plastering it around campus with posters isn't really a feasible option right now. So what I did is created a community partner online bulletin board. So I post that to my website, and so students can go in and see these flyers on this wellness website. I guess what I wanted to also stress is just making sure that if you are engaging in this work and if you are looking for partnerships, make sure you find the right tables to sit at. And make sure that you're finding the places where these conversations are happening. For me, that was through work with county collaboratives, specifically the human services coordinating bodies, also some regional substance awareness and communities that care coalitions. There are a lot of amazing people and great providers that come to those meetings, and that's a really great way to understand the work that they're doing. Also, when they're advertising services that they're offering, that's a great way to have that initial conversation about, well, I wonder if our students might be a population that you're looking to serve. So kind of just making sure that you're at the right table to have those conversations with the right people. And definitely find the organizations who are looking for your populations or populations to serve and have funding to do that. That's a great way to kind of have a mutually beneficial relationship. So they're looking to serve a certain population, or they have certain check boxes they need to mark. And so sometimes we can help provide that access for them, specifically with the community counseling partnership. Those are students at the master level who are looking to complete their licensure for counseling. And so they need hours to do that. We had students that needed mental health support. And so it was a mutually beneficial relationship for both of us. And that will continue to expand as we look to bring on a full-time mental health counselor and build capacity, because one person trying to address the needs of mental health for an entire campus is probably not sustainable. So we're looking to build that capacity as well. So I guess that's my little spiel. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Priya. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I really, really endorse looking at the webpage that Amy shared. There is a graphic that talks about the pillars of financial wellness. And it's been really interesting how different colleges are organizing this. But I think what Amy's point that I really want to also underscore is it matters how the students access this. So we can still offer all these services and know that they're possible in the community, but that kind of love connection between what the student needs and what is available in the way that the students need it, that is something that our role as institutions continues to evolve into. I'd love to go ahead and invite our second of three community college practitioners, Anne from Glen Oaks. I feel like I'm on the radio. Anne from Glen Oaks. Happy.
Come on down. So I'm Anne Springsteen. I'm the director of our TRIO Student Support Services program here at Glen Oaks. I'm also the co-chair of our Campus Cupboard, which is our free student food pantry. And that's what I'm going to kind of focus on here. A couple of years ago, if you're not familiar with Glen Oaks, we're a very small, very rural community college. A couple of years ago, we built our first residence hall on campus, and we have a lot of athletes living there, as well as students from across the state. It became really apparent within the first couple of weeks of that semester when the residence hall opened that there were students who did not have enough food. And it was coming in from across campus. We were hearing it from the coaches, athletic directors, residence hall director. And so we realized pretty quickly that we needed to do something about this. One of our former co-chairs was a social worker who was very well connected with community resources. And she knew of a coalition of local food pantries, and they call that the Emergency Care Network. And they kind of partner together to submit grants and, just help each other out as they're serving the community. In order to partner with the South Michigan Food Bank, which is a great way to stock your student food pantry, you need to have a nonprofit status. And so the Emergency Care Network offered to be our fiduciary. And so that gave us our 503 status so that we were able to partner with the food bank and purchase food for pennies on the dollar. So we started out with a really small grant from our foundation. We created the campus cupboard from that. We stocked it. We found that the partnership between me who works in office and student services, and our other co-chair, which is our residence hall director, works really well because the housing staff they have access to the food pantry. They can bring students over if they become aware of a student who's hungry. Immediately, they can serve that need. And then also we just work really well together. With that community organization, the Emergency Care Network, we also are connected to the larger community of food pantries. If we have things, because you get in bulk from the food bank, and oftentimes there are donation drives and things like that where you have more than you need, or things that your students are not going to use. And so it's nice to have that connection, because we can hop on an email list and say, hey, I've got 50 cans of green beans that are going to expire in a few months, and pass them along to somebody else in need that's within that network. So we've been in process for about 2 years now, and I feel like we're just now getting things really rolling really smoothly. There's a lot more than it would appear to create and run a food pantry, but we've got a lot of support from the community and from the students and from staff and faculty on campus.
Thank you so much, Anne. And what I love about your example is around how recognizing a very specific need for students offered a way for you to realize other partnerships in the community where you are stronger as a group together. And I think it was mentioned earlier by Rachel and others from JFF around how can strengthening that regional coalition of work of people with shared visions and values and missions can also build leverage for applying for different types of funding sources or even emphasizing the value of doing something.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anne. Lisa from Northwestern Michigan.
Good morning. Yes, Lisa Thomas, and I'm Dean of Students at Northwestern Michigan College, or NMC, up in Traverse City, Michigan. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about our partnership with DHHS that formed over the last 8 or 9 years. But I have to start by saying that the first 20 years of my career was in child welfare. I worked primarily in the foster care system. And so I knew that that system well when I started in my position at NMC. And what I noticed is that in orientation and other times I was walking around campus, I would see the education planner. Her name for our part of the state is Susie Greenfelder. She's amazing. And just a quick shout out, every one of you has an education planner or maybe multiples, depending on what counties you serve. The state of Michigan, DHHS, has divided the state into areas. Like our education planner covers 5 counties in Northwest Michigan. And she's responsible for helping connect students, especially those that are currently in foster care or are in the system, to what their next educational goal is beyond high school. So she starts working with students that the foster care workers refer to her when they're sophomores, juniors in high school, and she starts to build a relationship with them. And then as they move towards college as an option, she gets them to that next step. She will come to campus with them, go to financial aid with them, walk them around the campus, stop in our office. Well, of course, I knew Susie from my 20 years in that field. And so we started talking. And I said, you know, what are the biggest barriers you see? And she started telling me, and it was, most of it was unfortunately financial aid, because students are very intimidated by that. They don't understand it. Students who've experienced foster care already have an innate shame around their history, having to explain that they don't have parents that they're going to claim their income. They came out of the foster care system, they're a ward of the court. All those things are very painful for students to have to share or relive. Many students who experience foster care resent systems and multiple departments. And so they just go, you know what, never mind. So Susie goes on the path with them, and we started talking about what are the barriers to getting in at NMC or at any college. And we started with residence life, financial aid, admissions, and not to say they were the barriers, but their function within the college was creating barriers that we didn't always see. We didn't always have that lens. So I'm going to just quickly share this slide that hopefully you can all see. This was just kind of a way we started visioning it. We asked our admissions director to waive the $25 registration fee, which actually we no longer have, because it was a barrier for lots of reasons. And again, this applies to all vulnerable students. This isn't just about students who've experienced foster care, but that was the realm the lens I was looking at it with our education planner. So we waived the fee Financial aid was a huge piece of it. Our financial aid director at the time designated one of her staff, one of her specialists, to become immersed in foster care, understanding how it worked, how to best help students understand the FAFSA when you're coming out of the foster care system. What does that mean? When they would see Susie coming with a student, they would put them in a side office so they didn't have to stand out in the open office area and exclaim, yeah, well, I'm sorry, I'm a ward of the court. Or so they really recognized the need for some privacy. That was a huge step. And then Residence Life isn't on this chart, but they were a big partner too, because many of youth who've experienced foster care don't have a safety net, including don't have stable housing. And so our director of housing at the time waived the $250 deposit to hold a dorm room. And then Susie would come along, and as you know, the government takes a while to cut checks. Crazy. But eventually that $250 would come from DHHS, but they waived that in the meantime so the student could get that housing contract in place so that they were assured a dorm room, and that was really important. And then Student Life was the other department, though, and that's one that I directly oversee because our 2 mental health counselors work out of that area. One of our mental health counselors is also a trained academic advisor. So we were kind of the handoff of once the student is here and is starting their time at NMC, we were trying to check in with them, like, you know, do you need a success coach? How are things going? Are there areas that you have questions about that you might need support with? So we were kind of the handoff then. And then what happened was I went to Susie, you know, why don't we see if we can find a little time on our campus for you to work off our campus, because many of the youth who experience foster care don't have vehicles. So they didn't know how to get to the DHHS office. The bus line, which is limited in Traverse City, didn't go to that building. And so I just went to my boss and said, hey, we have a part-time staff in one of our offices. Could Susie share that office with her? And 20 hours a week, could she have office hours here? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And then Susie went to her boss at DHHS and said, can I have work release time to be over at the college, you know, 15 hours, 20 hours a week? And her boss said, yeah. And so then that happened. And so not during pandemic times, but in normal times, Susie is here 2 times a week. And she has kind of an active caseload of, you know, she's been working with these students. She knows they're now studying here on our campus, and they usually check in with her once a week, sometimes twice a month. And as they get settled and they're, you know, getting acclimated, maybe it's less, but sometimes there's a crisis and then she's available for them. If they're in an independent living program through DHHS, she has a check for them once a month. So then they do show up to get that check, understandably. And so it has really worked out well. And Susie has become kind of a life coach of that really, and she knows our departments well, so she knows how to navigate and get those students to what they might also need. And so it's been a robust program. And one of the other outcomes of it is that other students heard about it. They're like, well, I have Medicaid. Can I talk to her? And I'm like, yeah. And so she will talk to any student that has a question about how to navigate DHHS services, bridges, you know, food stamps, other kind of assistance. And because she's such an effective bridge, she's like, oh yeah, I know the person that you need to talk to. Here's their name and number. So it's worked really well to have her as a partner. And I couldn't be more pleased with how it fell into place. And it's been a very successful program without, in essence, a ton of legwork. It was the office space that was really one of the keys to make it the kind of program that I was hoping it could be.
Lisa, thank you for sharing that. There's so many tendrils of conversations that we could easily go into. I want to acknowledge a couple of quick questions that came in through the chat for you. One was from Erica about, could you just confirm the application fee for all students, was that eliminated, or how did that?
Yeah, it was waived probably 2 or 3 years ago, and there were a lot of departments that wanted it gone because it was a, it was a bummer for the business office because it would put a hold on the student's account to register. And so everyone went, why are we doing this? And so we stopped. And I think our students experienced foster care who also had that barrier. There were a number of us that said it's time to waive that. So yeah, it was a group effort.
Thank you for saying that. And I think that that is probably a fee. Rob and I, when we work with other colleges, we talked about these like antiquated, out of date practices that probably made sense at a particular time where that fee actually had a purpose. But over time, it has evolved, or rather devolved, into being an unintentional obstacle and barrier for students. So in a way, the question that I think you're almost asking is, how are we as the institution getting in the way of our students? And so even if we could create and recreate all these other systems, sometimes we just have to do some undoing on our own part to just clear the path for students. I really appreciate that. And an application fee, even if it's double digits or forbid triple digits, right? That can be a barrier in very large and serious ways for students. There was another question from Holly, and Holly, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives at Grand Rapids and how you're doing partnership work at the college. Holly was curious if you would talk a little bit about how you've been managing the caseloads between Suzy/DHHS and then also your campus as well. Lisa.
So generally, Suzy is the point person, and I'm assuming you mean by caseload those youth that have experienced foster care that are now our college students. She's the primary point person, but as she's talking to them and realizing, boy, I think this student could really benefit from personal counseling, from tutoring, from other needs, then she walks them, although we're all in the same area. She'll say, hey, I want you to meet Paul, or I want you to meet Jackie, or one of our counselors, if they're available, or come meet Lisa. And then tutoring is just down the hall from us. Advising is, our success coaches are. So we're really all kind of in the same space. And we're big believers in walking the student to that next handoff, to that next person. So the caseload really rests with Suzy with DHHS, but we get familiar with the students because they come into our office, they check in to meet with Suzy, and we get to know them. And then they just kind of merge into all of the vulnerable students that we're working with. So we don't try to single them out either, because they want to be just like any other student, and get to the resources they need and keep moving forward.
And I wonder, so I'd like to introduce Kate and offer Kate's perspective from being a community partner kind of on the other side of this relationship. But Lisa, I don't want to forget what you're talking about around destigmatizing and normalizing services. And maybe that's something that we can come back to as a group once we hear a little bit from Kate as well. So hold that thought. And Kate, I'm just so grateful that you're here to provide us a little bit of insight and perspective from where you sit. So Kate, please.
Yeah, thank you. I am excited to be here, and just kind of hearing about how all the systems are kind of working together and trying to figure this out. It warms my heart to see that that people are thinking in a systemic way rather than just sort of like a focused narrow. So that, and I think when it comes to serving kids and young adults, that's really how we have to think more systemically rather than sort of individually. So yeah, my name is Kate Jarvis, and I work for Hospice Care of Southwest Michigan. And most of you are probably familiar with what a hospice is or how we work, but the main focus of our services is for those who are dying or at the end of life, and providing that medical care and support. The other part of hospice is providing bereavement support or grief and loss, and all hospices provide that. However, not all hospices provide it at the same level. Our hospice here in Kalamazoo, we serve a 9-county area. We are a nonprofit, and our bereavement department has an outreach or a community portion to our bereavement services. So that's me and some other of my coworkers. And my role in the community and in our agency is to provide grief and loss groups to K through 12 schools And I provided those in Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, and Portage. Most recently, I've looked at the colleges. We have 3 in our area. We have Kalamazoo College, Western, and then we have Kalamazoo Valley Community College just within our county. So we have a large section, or a large population of that, an 18 to 30-year-old population that's kind of, part of our service area, but we haven't always known how to access them. They're busy, right? Usually they're in school, they're working. Some of them have families. And so it's just kind of a struggle and a challenge for us. And just to follow up on what Amy had mentioned is that, yes, nonprofits do have populations that oftentimes they are looking to serve, but aren't always sure how to do that or where to go to access that. So for us, the question needed to be asked of, or at least for me, the question needed to be asked about, you're a grief support counselor, school grief support counselor. Well, school doesn't end when you're 18, right? And it took me a second, and that is true. School does not end when you're 18. There is this large portion of young adults that are also grieving. And oftentimes when we think about grief, we think about death, right? That's usually the big one. However, there are multiple ways that people grieve, whether it's a relationship, whether it's that they are not in a relationship with their parent due to incarceration, foster care, some kind of separation. There's all different kinds of grief that we experience. And it can be as simple as, I'm moving away from home for the first time. There's a lot of transition and grief issues with that also. So if we think about grief and loss in more of that general term of mental health or mental wellness, then certainly there are lots of community agencies that work in that realm and are looking to work with this population, this 18 to 30-year-old. And I know most colleges have older folks than 30, but generally this population tends to be a little bit more of a struggle to access. So from our perspective, from a community-based agency, we're looking to serve the community as a nonprofit. That's part of our goal. That's part of our mission, that, we're funded by the community to provide community services. So working in colleges and university makes sense in that perspective. And I think just to kind of follow up on what Lisa and Anne and Amy were saying is sometimes you just have to ask the question. You have to get to the people who you can ask the question of, and then also ask the question. And sometimes it's not a direct question. Sometimes it's a how about, or a wonder if. And sometimes that allows you to open up doors and think in different kinds of ways. Certainly the relationship that each of us come to partnership with, whether we know somebody that's working in that field or we are aware of somebody that's working in that field, those certainly do help. And I think also when it comes to the actual working with colleges, being able to communicate well and consistently with whoever your partnering person is, whether it's in the agency or in the college, is extremely helpful. A lot of times with mental health, we can put a lot of work into creating a program or a workshop, and the turnout is very low, right? And we've now put in hundreds of hours, and we only have 2 or 3 people. And so sometimes we need to think about and then the conversation automatically becomes, okay, so is this worth it, right? I would always say yes, but oftentimes those decisions are above my pay grade. But I would say that sometimes we have to think about these projects or these initiatives more in terms of the long term, or like a marathon rather than a sprint. And if it doesn't work out one semester, that doesn't mean you just throw it away and it's done. You kind of have to keep at it, just kind of keep plugging away at it. And I would say, again, in terms of mental health, if it's just 2 or 3 or 4 that would be okay. That's 2 or 3 or 4 you didn't have before, right? And sometimes, particularly with mental health, it takes some time to get programs established and rolling. And it's just the stick-to-itiveness of the agency and the university or the college, and you know, what their philosophy is and what their goals and their values are. And again, most nonprofits are looking to serve this population in this community. Now, if say, for instance, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this and, you know, how to maintain those relationships, but or if there's questions about that, that would probably be, we can be a little bit more specific with that. But I would concur and agree with what's already been said, that nonprofits are looking to do this kind of work, and agencies are looking to do this kind of work and partner with you to provide these services.
Kate, if I could keep you in my pocket at all time, I would. I hope that listening to you only inspires us to continue to amplify the voices of our community partners that provide a different perspective on the why of doing this work and what is important in this work. I want to lift up just a couple of things. One, that this is really people-to-people work, and transactional work is really critical in this to make sure that folks get what they need, but it is relational work about these long-term people-to-people communications and relationships. The other thing, we only have a few minutes. Life is funny that way, and what is time? So I'm going to invite one quick, feel free to mention any questions for our panelists in the chat. And I'm gonna ask and indulge our partners in shifting this last few minutes. One thing that has come in time and time again, both anecdotally and through research, is that the very students who could benefit most from many of these services are the least likely to get them. And Lisa, when I think about what you said, that quote of how students can talk themselves out of something because the system, the process itself is so arduous, it requires you to, and Rob, thank you for mentioning this, like relive trauma or have to re-explain yourself to other people just to be able to access the starting point. So feel free if you have questions, but I'd love to invite the panelists to talk a little bit about how you've been working to normalize services, how you've been working to let students see that they are worthy and have dignity in accessing these services, but just how can we continue to normalize this as the broader types of supports that students can expect community colleges to facilitate, not necessarily provide directly, but facilitate.
I think from again, from a community partners perspective, and particularly in mental health, the goal is to normalize what they're experiencing. And just in the work that I've done in K through 12, that we know that when there's a mental health struggle, there's often academic struggle. And a lot of times when we give support or we give reassurance that what they're experiencing is, yes, this is part of the process. If it feels bad, it's because it is bad. Yeah, you should be feeling this way. This is completely normal. And then what do you do with that, right? Oftentimes, I think what's helpful in that is knowing, one, how to access that, whether that's the students, and whether the student has that information, but it's also faculty and staff. A lot of times these kids show up in class, or they're not attending class, or homework isn't getting turned in, and they may reveal or say to a professor or a teacher, hey, you know, I'm just going through a lot right now. And then what's that person to do with them? It's helpful for that advisor, that teacher, that professor to say, you know what, I think X, Y, and Z would be able to help you. And as Lisa said, kind of that handoff, right, to this is where you can go to get support has been, at least in my perspective, anecdotally, how students have gotten to me, and also what I think has helped in creating that environment within the school that, you know what, they do want me to succeed. They do want me to be, they do want me to succeed. Yeah.
I think piggybacking off of what Kate is saying is another point about faculty, that having those community partnerships allows us to bring in people to train our faculty on what is grief, how is it going to show up in your classroom, what are the signs that you might be looking for. So we do that kind of across the board. Even with our recovery program, they get into the classroom, they talk with instructors, and so having that connection is just so beneficial for the entire college, in addition to the student, in addition to the community partnership. It's just a holistic value for everyone.
Yeah, and again, just that the professors and the teachers and the faculty, they don't have to fix this, right? They just have to have the knowledge to know where these kids can get some assistance, right? And that's, yeah.
I would also add that a research article I read shortly after I started at NMC that my boss said, hey, read this, said that one of the greatest predictors of success in college is not your GPA from high school or your IQ testing. It's whether you're willing to ask and seek out help. And I was like, whoa, really? That's it, eh? And so we always try to structure all our interactions with all of our students, but definitely our more vulnerable students. I always end or start to wrap up every conversation with, hey, what other questions do you have? So it shows the student like questions are normal, and make sure to take the time that they get those questions answered, or they feel it's an atmosphere where you can ask any of those kind of questions. And then that handoff is important. And back to Amy's point earlier, having folks on your team that are part of those community collaboratives can be so helpful when the student needs a local resource, and maybe it's a narrow resource that you're like, boy, I've never had anyone ask me that. But when you have those partners in your communities from those community collaboratives, you can reach out and email someone and go, what about someone that needs whatever that is? And so it's kind of a combination of, on my slide, I had a logo about internal and external champions. And that's really how I've had to think about it. You have to have key internal champions, like those awesome financial aid people that now are really ready to help our youth who've experienced foster care, but the external champions are just as important too.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. The two things that also stick out, this idea of building student agency and feeling like they can ask questions. And I'd like to also just push that a little further, and also to help students see that they don't have to take no for an answer, that they can continue and advocate for themselves to get what they need. And Rob, I just appreciate so much the comments that you're placing in chat, particularly this last one about the role of faculty. And we talk about faculty as a monolith, but they're not, right? We also know that many of our faculty, in fact, the majority of many of our institutions have adjunct faculty. And when there are part-time faculty, there's a whole set of conversations on whether some of the adjunct faculty actually experience the same hardships as their own students, all the way to they may not be as engaged in even knowing what is available on campus. And so how can you support and make this connection expectation easier for them as well? So I really appreciate you saying that, Lisa, about ways to be able to support students inside and outside the classroom. I know we're at time, but are there any additional, I look to the panelists, I look to anyone that wants to have a final word. I just saw Rob pop up as well. Rob, would you like to?
No, just saying, I mean, you guys were awesome as panelists. I mean, this issue around, I mean, faculty aren't trained in this, right? I mean, there's no training for this. Like, you show up, you give an accord. I mean, there's no training in most things around pedagogy, but there's definitely not training for this. So, you're relying on the intuition and experience and navigational abilities of faculty who haven't been trained in this. And this isn't a deficit approach. It's just much as with our students saying, and Priya has talked a lot about student services syllabi, but this idea of what are the three things to look for? What are the three things you should do in these short, targeted, almost like laminated card ways, or just, I talk to faculty all the time who, one of my best friends is a part-time faculty in California who I went to college with. And he talks about the stress of these situations and having no knowledge, like he sees the issues in his students, right? But I mean, knowing what to do, I mean, he ends up doing the warm handoff thing and figuring it out. But there's not a lot of consideration from the college in empowering those faculty to recognize the situations. And then what do you want them to do, right? And so what I was saying in the chat is you can actually de-stress this for your faculty, right? And so some of your faculty do this very well. This is, again, not a deficit model, but just to get to normalize it for your faculty that it's okay to look for these issues and potentially intervene in positive ways. I mean, I think it's, again, it's that intersection of the culture and empathy thing we're trying to put forward. So just amazing panel. Thank you guys all so much.
Yeah, I would agree with you that this is even working with teachers in K through 12. It's very stressful to have a student reveal something to you and you go, I know how to do math. I know how to teach English, but I don't know what to do with this. And so just that freedom or that ability to go, I don't know, but I know who does.
And Kate, that there's also that issue of how, in some ways, and I'm a psychologist as well, we can unintentionally shut down those conversations from happening because we don't have the answers to if they come up, right? So that's mostly subconscious, but that has effects on the greater relationship between faculty and students, right? So if we can empower people and get them to feel comfortable in uncomfortable situations, it may actually change some of the relationships that we've had with students. I mean, you guys have other things to do. But what we've learned during the pandemic is how important these empathy conversations are and considerations, right? And we've all done a really good job. You have all done amazing jobs with this for the last 11 months in crazy circumstances. And one of the questions is, how do you take that empathy and build it into your structure and culture going forward? And I think this is one of those areas where you could see something tangible to build a foundation on, right? And so just great stuff from all of you.
I would also second that if a student is coming to you and saying these things, that you've already done a lot of work around safety and creating an environment that they feel safe. And so good job to those folks. Even though it's stressful, you've done a lot of work already that you probably didn't even know about. And so that's huge. That's huge for kids that are struggling. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to each of the panelists for sharing your experiences and providing insight. And I wish you could continue talking, but Precious, back to you.
I feel like we could spend another workshop just talking about this alone.
Right.
I always love and appreciate our panel discussions, and today is no exception. Thank you, Anne, Amy, Kate, Lisa, Holly, adding some things that GRCC are doing in the chat. Thank you, Priya, for facilitating this conversation. If you all would like a refresher on ways in which you can make sure you are creating safe spaces for your students so that you know what to look for as you intervene and support students in meeting their basic needs. We did a workshop last summer regarding mental health, how to be a first aid person regarding mental health. That workshop and recording is still found on our website, so feel free to check out our resources to be able to watch that again. We are now going to segue into our breakout groups to allow for some more pointed and intimate conversations about any aha moments you might have had throughout our workshop today. I'm going to place some questions in the chat that you can use as starting points for your conversations. You don't have to stick with these questions if there are other things that are top of mind that you want to share with your colleagues, of things that are working at your campus regarding connecting to communities or organizations, ways in which you have navigated some barriers around connecting with organizations, especially if you're in a rural community. Feel free to share freely as you feel comfortable doing. If you would like access to these questions in the chat, you should open your chat feature now. So when you get into your breakout rooms, the questions will be, you can access the questions in your chat function. So Erica's going to be breaking us up into our breakout groups. And I just want to preface that we are going to share next steps after the breakout groups and your self-care challenge between now and the next workshop as well. So Erica, I will switch it over to you. main room. We are just talking about Valentine's Day, which is an up and coming day that some people choose to recognize and some choose to recognize it with chocolate. I don't have any chocolate for next steps, but what I do have are some information or things to just keep in your mind as you are moving forward with My Best is the coaching opportunities for NCII. The project leads have already been given information on how they can schedule an appointment to talk about goals in which you want to accomplish over the next 6 to 12 years and glean all of the wisdom that is available to you from NCII. We also have some very amazing and capable NCSS mentors who have already begun to connect with some of you to make sure that you are offered with support, encouragement, another colleague who is also working to integrate different practices to make sure that the student experience is the best that it can be so that students can persist to completion. So if you are interested in being connected with a mentor and haven't been connected with yet, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can make a connection for you. But if you are interested in sharing your experience and just being a partner to lock arms with another institution and want to become a mentor, I offer that as an opportunity as well. I believe that we can accomplish so much more when we do it together, and mentoring is an amazing opportunity to lock arms with someone who understands and is in this with you. I also welcome you all to follow us on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. If I reach out to you about an article, writing an article just to highlight what is happening at your institution, just know that that might come down the pipeline at some point. We'd love to share and elevate your voices and experiences and what is working at your institution and how you're navigating the things that might be challenging as we are working with student success efforts. And lastly, we have our next event, the Trellis webinar, to talk about students' experiences in Michigan, March 31st from 2 to 3:30. You can register for that now. And I leave with you a self-care challenge between now and our next workshop or next time we communicate and connect with one another. The first one is to enjoy your lunch break. So actually take a step away from your desk or your office or your workstation just to really decompress from things that might have happened in the first half of your day as you prepare to go into the next half of your day. So enjoy your lunch break. The second is to set your intention in between tasks. I know it can be easy for us to go from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, from this appointment to the next appointment, but I think that there is some value to being able to decompress from one conversation and situation and successfully transition into the next one because you allowed your mind some opportunity to regroup, regather, and go into the next event in your day with good intentions and just as a whole being. And the last thing I welcome you to try is to celebrate the win. It's easy to celebrate when you get a grant. It's easy to celebrate when everyone's on the same page about getting rid of college fees or application fees. But there are conversations that happened in between those big wins that I think warrants some celebration. So as you go throughout your day and other things that you choose to do, whether work related or not, celebrate the small wins that are taking place as you are accomplishing the big wins that you have set your sights on. I always appreciate connection and welcome you to connect with me at any point, even if it's just to have a virtual coffee date. I welcome relationships and connection. I love the opportunity that we had to connect today. Thank you for your time, and the recordings will be sent to you once it is available. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.